On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 took off from Larnaca, Cyprus, heading toward Athens. It was supposed to be a routine flight, a short hop across the Mediterranean before continuing on to Prague. But within minutes, that ordinary journey turned into one of aviation's most haunting tragedies. The Boeing 737 climbed smoothly into the clear morning skies, but something was very wrong. A crucial setting on the aircraft's pressurization system had been left in manual mode. As the jet climbed higher, the cabin failed to pressurize. Slowly, silently, oxygen levels dropped. Before long, both the pilots and passengers were slipping into unconsciousness. For over an hour, the aircraft circled over Greece as if possessed, a ghostly machine flying without human control. Fighter jets scrambled to intercept the silent intruder. When the pilots of those jets peered inside, what they saw was chilling. Oxygen masks dangling from the ceiling, passengers slumped motionless in their seats, and a cockpit with no one responding. Flight 522 had become a ghost plane at 34,000 feet. But how could such a disaster happen? The answer is not just about a single switch left in the wrong position. It is a story of overlooked warnings, a corporate culture that valued speed over safety, and a chain of human errors that would ultimately cost 121 lives. To understand, we must start with Helios Airways itself. Founded in 1998, Helios was Cyprus's first private airline, built on the promise of low-cost travel. Its fleet was small, just 3 Boeing 737 aircraft, but its ambitions were big. Serving holiday destinations in Greece, the UK, and across Europe, the airline quickly expanded. Behind the scenes, though, cracks were forming. Audits revealed troubling safety issues. Employees described a culture of fear where speaking up against unsafe practices risked their jobs. Maintenance schedules were tight, sometimes too tight, leaving little room for thorough inspections. Crew members complained of being pushed to work excessive hours, with some claiming they had not taken proper leave in years. Regulators even warned Helios in 2004 that its license to operate could be suspended if it did not improve its safety record. But the airline kept flying. The aircraft involved in the crash, registration 5BDBY, had already shown signs of trouble. Months before the disaster, it had suffered a rapid decompression due to a faulty door seal, forcing an emergency landing. Although the problem was repaired, further issues were reported. On August 13th, just one day before the fatal flight, engineers once again worked on the pressurization system. To test the cabin, they set the pressurization mode to manual. But when the work was finished, the switch was never returned to automatic. That small oversight would prove fatal. When Flight 522 lifted off from Larnaca at 9:07 a.m., everything seemed routine. At the controls was Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten, a 59-year-old German contract pilot with decades of experience. Beside him sat First Officer Pampos Charalambaus, a 51-year-old Cypriot who had been with Helios since 2000. On board were 4 cabin crew and 115 passengers, making a total of 121 souls. Shortly after takeoff, as the jet climbed through 16,000 feet, an alarm blared in the cockpit. To the crew, it sounded like a takeoff configuration warning, a system that alerts pilots if the aircraft is not properly set up for takeoff. But in reality, it was the cabin altitude warning, signaling that the cabin was losing pressure. Tragically, both alarms used the exact same sound. Confused, the pilots assumed it was a technical glitch. They did not put on their oxygen masks, nor did they descend to a safer altitude. Instead, they continued climbing into thinner air. Within minutes, Captain Merten radioed Helios's operations center, reporting strange issues. His words were already showing signs of confusion, an early symptom of hypoxia or oxygen deprivation. He spoke about problems with the cooling system, even though nothing was actually wrong with it. On the ground, engineer Alan Irwin began piecing together what might be happening. Suspecting a pressurization issue, he tried to ask the captain whether the system was set to automatic, but the message was misunderstood. The conversation grew increasingly disjointed until, at 9:20 a.m., radio contact was lost. By then, both pilots had likely lost consciousness. The jet leveled off at 34,000 feet, following the autopilot settings entered earlier. For the next hour and a half, Flight 522 drifted silently above Greece, fuel slowly burning away. Inside the cabin, oxygen masks had dropped. but they were only designed to last about 15 minutes, just enough time for an emergency descent. With no descent, the passengers too fell unconscious, never to wake again. Athens air traffic controllers tried again and again to reach the flight, but received no reply. Finally, 2 Greek F-16 fighter jets were scrambled. When they reached the ghostly 737 at 11:24 a.m., they looked inside and saw the heartbreaking truth: rows of motionless passengers in an unresponsive cockpit. Then at 11:49 a.m., something unexpected happened. One of the F-16 pilots reported seeing a man enter the flight deck, later identified as flight attendant Andreas Prodromou. He was among the few crew members with a commercial pilot's license. And unlike the passengers, he had managed to remain conscious a little longer by using a portable oxygen bottle. Prodromou's actions were heroic. With the captain and first officer incapacitated, he attempted to save the aircraft. The fighter jet pilots observed him struggling to sit in the captain's seat, donning the headset and trying to make sense of the controls. Witnesses later recalled seeing him wave to the F-16 pilots, signaling that he was at least aware of their presence. But by this point, the situation was almost impossible to reverse. The oxygen supply was nearly depleted, the pressurization issue had gone unresolved, and Prodromou himself was rapidly succumbing to hypoxia. Tragically, he never managed to take full control. Investigators believe he tried to restart the engine's fuel pumps, which had already begun shutting down due to fuel starvation. At 11:54 a.m., the left engine flamed out, followed shortly after by the right. The Boeing 737, now powerless, began a slow, inevitable descent. The F-16 pilots stayed close, watching helplessly as the ghost plane dropped lower and lower. At 12:04 p.m., after nearly 3 hours in the air, Helios Airways Flight 522 slammed into a hillside near Grammatico, just north of Athens. The impact was catastrophic. All 121 people on board were killed instantly. For Greece and Cyprus, the disaster was a national tragedy, and for the aviation world, it was a chilling reminder of how a simple oversight can snowball into unimaginable loss. The investigation that followed revealed a chain of failures. Central to the tragedy was the misset pressurization switch, left in manual mode after the previous day's maintenance. But investigators also criticized the confusing cockpit warnings, especially the identical sound for both the takeoff configuration and cabin altitude alerts. That design flaw had sown deadly confusion. Equally troubling were the airline's practices. Helios Airways was accused of cutting corners on safety, of failing to ensure proper training, and of ignoring earlier warnings from regulators. Survivors' families demanded justice, insisting that their loved ones had died not from a freak accident, but from negligence. Years later, a Cypriot court found 4 former Helios officials guilty of manslaughter by negligence, though their convictions were later overturned on appeal. For aviation as a whole, Flight 522 became a turning point. Regulators moved to address design issues, including changes to cockpit alert systems to avoid identical warning sounds. Airlines reinforced training around pressurization emergencies, ensuring that flight crews would recognize hypoxia symptoms and respond by donning oxygen masks immediately. Safety authorities also tightened oversight on low-cost carriers, emphasizing that profitability could never come at the expense of passenger safety. Yet even with these changes, the haunting image of a plane flying itself with 121 unconscious souls aboard has never faded. Families of the victims continue to hold memorials each August, remembering parents, children, and friends lost in what should have been a routine flight. For them, the pain endures, compounded by the belief that their loved ones' deaths could and should have been prevented. In the end, the story of Helios Flight 522 is not just about a technical failure. It is about the human cost of complacency, of overlooked warnings, and of small mistakes with devastating consequences. It is about a flight attendant who tried in his final moments to save everyone aboard. And it is about the sobering lesson that in aviation, no detail is too small to matter. Helios Airways itself never recovered. Under mounting pressure, lawsuits, and a shattered reputation, the airline ceased operations in 2006. But its legacy endures, not in routes flown or passengers served, but in the lessons carved into aviation history. Flight 522 remains a case studied by pilots and safety investigators worldwide, a tragic reminder of how fragile life can be at 34,000 feet. From the moment it lifted off that bright August morning to its final crash near Athens, Helios Airways Flight 522 carried with it a chilling truth. In aviation, safety depends not on luck, but on vigilance, precision, and the courage to speak up when something is wrong. And when those elements fail, the results can be devastating.